Thank you, George. Can we have the first slide? So unlike next slide, please. Unlike many of your schools, the Brick Church School is actually part of the Brick Church. I think the rest of you are independent schools. We are not totally independent. Our board answers to the session of the church, which is the governing body of the church. So anything major, anything that involves money first gets approved by the day school committee and then goes to the session of the church. The school was founded in 1940 and the church in 1767. So 2 big anniversaries. Last year we celebrated the school's 75th birthday, and this year the church is celebrating its 250th birthday. And that, of course, was nice background to doing the joint campaign. Brick is an early childhood school. We have children from 2 years, 10 months up to 6. And as George mentioned, we also have a summer program for low-income children. Next slide, please. So the major fundraising that the school does, we have an annual fund every year, and every other year we do an auction, and both those funds help to supplement our operating budget. And we have approximately 204 people a year that give. And our last campaign was in 2006 when we raised $3 million to improve faculty salaries. And our yearly budget is around $4 million. Our endowment before we started the campaign was at $6 million and has grown to $9 million over the course of the campaign. We were the second early childhood school in the state to join NYSAIS, and our first accreditation was in 1990. In our 2010 accreditation, the major recommendation from the visiting committee was that we do a long-range financial plan and a strategic plan. And when we did the long-range financial plan, we realized we weren't on a sustainable path. And when we did the strategic plan, we asked parents, well, should we raise tuition more? Should we cut financial aid, cut program, or should we fundraise more? And the overwhelming response was that we should fundraise more. Also, as an early childhood school, we are very committed to financial aid. We give away over $500,000 a year, which is high for an early childhood school. So we decided to undertake this capital campaign jointly with the church because of the 2 anniversaries. And our main goals, well, for the school, it was to increase the endowment so we would be less dependent on annual giving, to do a joint construction project with the church to make the entrance safer, to improve our roof playground, which I know one of you is interested in, and to make an atrium over part of our outdoor space so we would have a usable space all year round. The church also was concerned about mission outreach. That was part of their campaign. So that's generally what we set out to do. And now I'll turn it over to Charlie.
Lydia, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for participating in this. When Lydia and I gave this presentation firstly, it was in the Catskills, it was in New Paltz in the middle of a snowstorm. So it's nice we don't have that kind of weather to deal with. What we'd like to spend the bulk of our time talking with you about is how the campaign was planned, the successes that Lydia and Michael Lindvall had, because it was really the 2 of them as leaders of the school and the church respectively who did the lion's share of the fundraising. And people very much responded to their leadership. There was a certain style to the campaign that I think was very different from their previous efforts, and people responded to it. And then we'd like to open it up for discussion, and we have a couple of questions, and then we're hoping that you'll have questions for us. So when we did this in New Paltz, obviously everybody was in person, and it was much easier to have back and forth and questions. But we're hoping that you'll chime in with questions as we go along, or email questions that we can deal with as they arise. So before we talk with you about the planning and the implementation, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes on like an overview of independent school fundraising. Many of you might be familiar with these numbers. When we started at Brick, with the school especially, the day committee, the governing body, the parents, they had a lot of questions over, like, how would the campaign fit into normal fundraising? Would it eat into annual giving? What should they anticipate? And we showed the group some like statistics from other schools. We didn't have these statistics to hand, but more and more, whether it's for schools or just really any of our clients, we're sharing a lot more information about what's happening in the sector. And I think this is where an organization like NYSAIS can be really, really helpful. I'm interested, like, are these numbers that you use in your own fundraising? Are there things that you're tracking? When we look at them, like, we're very encouraged. Annual giving is on the rise. Capital fundraising is on the rise. And what our experience was at Brick School and at the church is that if they did the two together, if they had a comprehensive campaign, that many families and alumni, but mostly families, would be prepared to do both, increase their annual giving and to make an extraordinary multi-year commitment to the capital campaign, to the comprehensive campaign, including endowment. Are these numbers like familiar to you, and are you using similar numbers in your own fundraising, either to demonstrate where you're leading and want to move ahead, or demonstrating areas where maybe your school is a little bit behind and you want or need to close the gap?
And again, all you need to do is unmute your microphone and jump right in.
We're falling a little short of these goals. Dean Foster from HUSAC. That's why I'm in, is to see what we can do to bring our numbers up.
We do a lot of fundraising with Jesuit institutions, Jesuit high schools, Jesuit colleges. And they're amazing. They're incredible about sharing the data with one another about what's happening. They use it to either close the gap or pull ahead, and it seems to benefit all of them. So just with that as a background, in terms of, again, fundraising trends for independent schools, maybe we'll switch gears and talk a little bit about the campaign for Brick. And it started with a feasibility study, which is not uncommon. Most of the school and other projects that we work with begin with some kind of planning exercise. And at Brick, that was no exception. We did a study over a 4-month period. And as Lydia mentioned, it was sort of both the church and the school together. There were some families that were only interested in the church, or like supporting the church portion, some who were only interested in the school portion, and then several who had sort of a foot in both in each camp. You know, there were church attendees and they had kids or had children in the school. So we did a 4-month study. We did a lot of sort of personal one-on-one interviews, mostly with parents. There was an e-survey that got a very high level of participation. More and more, we're finding that e-surveys is a good way of getting out information about a potential campaign that's on the horizon. Also obviously getting back information from alumni and parents and others, but also like using it as a way of trying to surface people who are willing to engage. So, you know, e-surveys are good about finding people who are just willing to engage, and that means a lot, obviously, in our business. So we got input from sort of many people. But what I think was like very helpful in the planning of the campaign is there was a lot of time spent with the senior leadership of the church and the school on exactly the type of campaign that they wanted to have. I think in previous efforts, the campaigns were very project driven. And that's fine and everything, but with Michaud Linval being very established at the church and Lydia being very established at the school, we thought there was an opportunity to like make the campaign and build the campaign around their vision for the future and their leadership, and getting people within the church and within the school comfortable with that style of fundraising. I think wound up being very helpful in the long run, and it happened gradually over the 4 months of the study. We also did some wealth screening and some analytics. For many schools, that's sort of a common practice. You're doing it on a regular basis. Other schools, it's a new thing for them. Wealth screening, I'll just say it's not the be all and end all. It's not the silver bullet, but it gives you some sense of where potentially top donors might reside. If you switch gears a little bit, if you go to the next slide, the campaign itself, so after the 4-month period, we made recommendations, and it was decided to have a combined campaign, like to do the campaign together, to do it around the 250th anniversary of the church and the 75th anniversary of the school. We advised that the school, that Brick, begin with a working goal rather than a hard and fast, we are going to set out to raise X. And one of the reasons we said that is because so much of this was about endowment. It wasn't strictly a capital campaign. They weren't like only building things or renovating things. And with the endowment portion of it, obviously the more you can raise, the stronger Brick will be in the future. But it was also the case that there were several families in the study who expressed an interest in Brick, expressed a willingness to give, and the range of their giving sort of varied greatly. There were some people who said, look, I could see doing 250,000, or I could see doing like significantly more. It really just depends. And so that working goal really helped keep the focus on early gifts at a leadership level. Like we kept saying, in order to reach 10 million as a working goal, the early commitments need to be at these levels. If you wanted to get to 12 or 14 or 16 million, you'd need larger gifts and you'd need them faster. So going through a series of working goals really helped keep the pressure on, I guess I'll say, like in a positive way, kept the focus on early gifts at a leadership level. And ultimately by design, we said, as you have success, the working goal would be increased and increased. So there were 3 phases to the campaign. It began with very large gifts and pledges, then sort of 5-figure and low 6-figure, and then the public phase. And it was clear that the public phase wasn't really going to raise a whole lot of money, but was very important in order to demonstrate that the whole campaign and the whole community was responsible and shared in the success of the campaign. If you go to the next slide. I think this is interesting. If you look at how the campaign unfolded, this is sort of month by month over the period of the active campaigning and when the gifts came in and the scale of the giving. So it began in earnest in sort of early 2016, and you can see within the first month or so, 5.6 million was raised from 17 donors. And then more donors joined, and you went from 17 to 62 gifts and 8.7 million raised. These charts we actually used during the campaign, like we were charting what success looked like. And at Brick, many of the families really warmed to it. It was using data and facts and figures to help fuel their enthusiasm for the campaign and raise their sights and get them excited about what Brick could accomplish as a result of a fully successful campaign. Again, especially given the endowment. Maybe I'll stop for a second and see if anybody has any questions so far about the like the study and the 4-month period and some of the key factors of that, or the campaign plan, or the success to date.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
This is Jared from Studio. Curious what you were polling for in that e-survey, in categories or any way you wish to describe it.
Yeah. There's a couple of schools of thought here. One is that you'd send out a very extensive, in-depth e-survey, lots of questions, a lot of demographics. We opted for a very light touch survey, maybe ask 10 questions. And the hope was that more people would fill it out and they would just sort of signal their willingness to engage. So the questions had to do with just general perceptions of Brick. Did they feel good about the institution? It had to do with, rank ordering the priorities that Lydia and Michael had for the campaign, whether it's endowment or improving facilities or improving safety. It was great to get a sense of like what was most motivational for people, like what was their trigger issue. And then we asked in a really like soft way about where Brick fit as a philanthropic priority for them, and would they be prepared to get involved in a campaign, and if so, how? We did not ask about like gift indications. I know some e-surveys ask people to identify on a table of gifts, where they could see themselves contributing. It's just a Brick that didn't seem appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Are other schools on the call today? Are you regularly using e-surveys just like generally to get feedback and generally to try and do some prospecting? It's one of these tools. It's like old school, and I think also fairly fresh. Like people will spend a couple of minutes filling out a quick survey, especially if you go back and you tell them what the results were and where they fit. Like, are they in the norm? Are they above average, below average? So if we advance the slide, this is a snapshot of where Brick is right now in their campaign. And 7 million of this is specifically dedicated to the school. Some of it is dedicated to the church, and then I think there's a lot that's overlapping. The improvements to the entrance, security, there's sort of shared benefits. So I think the impact on the school is going to be more than the 7 million that's been raised to date. And that's one of the powers of like having a combined campaign with the church. But these levels, in order to get to 16 million, required 3 commitments of $1 million or more, 3 at that $500,000 and up level 13, and so on and so on. And what we found through the course of the campaign is that using gift tables like this, and there were a lot of different gift tables. We looked at just like what the top 10 gifts needed to be and what participation rates needed to be, and we showed them to people. They got very excited about it. There were some portions of the campaign where we sat with people and we said, like, in order to have a good campaign at Brick, it requires these kinds of pledges. In order to have a great campaign, it requires higher level pledges. Would you like to have a good campaign or a great campaign? And I think almost everybody, Lydia, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yes.
opted to have like a great campaign. And they gave more because they saw how it fit in to these very practical tables. And we very, very much focused on, the largest gifts first, which is not uncommon. But at a place like Brick, it was unusual because I think in the past it was more of a let's do this all together and let's open up the floodgates and ask everybody to do their absolute best. Whereas this was a lot more sort of stage managed in terms of communications and site raising and making sure that people were ready to be asked before they were actually asked. Lydia, I was struck, especially with the first, let's say 50 gifts, of how many people who were school only, they weren't members of the church, were school only, but they valued Brick's, the school's relationship with the church. And they kind of valued that, the ethos and the values and the sense of community. How important would you say that sense of community was to your success in being able to achieve these levels?
Well, I think we probably have one of the strongest church-school relationships. I've certainly talked to lots of colleagues who have problems, but we very much, the school very much recognizes that a strong church is important to the school, and the church very much recognizes that a strong school is important to the church. So we all value community, and being part of a church, I think the parents really like the values espoused at the school. So there is a huge sense of community. We're, teaching children to think of others, and there are many opportunities for that, both in terms of children bringing in things for New York Common Pantry, and we have a relationship with a school in Liberia, West Africa. So I think people who come here choose the school because they want that strong sense of community. And those who are not church members like the fact that the church helps to provide that. So we do sometimes work together with the church on outreach projects. And we do have families from all different religions. They aren't all Christian at all, but they do like the sense of values.
Lydia, I was impressed. Of the 287 gifts that Brick has received to date, if you leave aside, just asking people to designate it either to the school or to the church or both, leave that aside. Very, very few people restricted it any further than that. A handful of people said, I only want my money to go to the endowment, or I only want my money to go to the work that's going to help increase security, or the rooftop, play area. Families were buying into your leadership, Michael's leadership, and the overall vision for the campaign for Brick. And I don't know whether other schools are positioning their fundraising that way or have had a similar experience. But it kind of bucks the trend of what a lot of philanthropy is doing, where donors are increasingly making restricted gifts. We didn't find that at Brick. They were really buying into your leadership and vision. And I think that may be an opportunity for some of the schools on the call, to get out in front of it and say, this is the campaign, this is where we need to make investments. We're asking you to invest in our plan, and to kind of watch it unfold with your philanthropy.
Yeah, I suspect that different people were probably more or less attracted by different aspects of it, but it's true. No one really specified exactly where they wanted their money to go. And one of the nice things about doing the combined campaign, the church has many families, many members whose children attended way long ago. And I don't think if we had done just a school campaign that we would have even thought to reach out to them. But because it was a combined campaign, church members gave a percentage of their gift to the school. So the church's pledge card said, I pledge whatever to the campaign for Brick, this percent to the church and this percent to the school. So I think the school did well as a result of that.
Could I ask a question of the group, just in terms of the levels of pledges in your own institutions? Are your gifts similar to these? Are there certain levels that are really drivers for your fundraising, and areas where you have a weakness or need to, identify more potential? Like, there was a lot obviously raised in the 50 to 250,000 in terms of number and value. That 10,000 a year for 5 years up to 50,000 a year for 5 years. That was really a sweet spot for Brick.
This was the first time, this is the third campaign the school has done. And this was the first time, at Charlie's direction, that I was the one asking people for money. I had never done that before. I had gone to meetings where one of the board members asked people for money, and I was there just to answer questions. But I think the fact that I did the direct asking helped people to commit more and at higher levels. I wasn't thrilled, but it worked.
Lydia, you know what else I think worked really well and in your favor is that for maybe the top 30 or 40 people, maybe more, you met with a lot of couples and you did a lot of briefings and then asks.
Yes.
You'd meet with them initially to say, look, this is what we're doing. These are the levels that we need to achieve in order to be successful. I want you obviously to express an interest in this. And can we come back to you with a proposal? And I think especially at Brick, families really like that. And obviously the results are sort of following through. You did exceptionally well. You got a high level of participation when you met people. I think maybe 95% of the people you met wound up making a pledge. And they gave at about 75% of what you asked them to consider. And I think some of that had to do with the briefing. And so when it came time to ask them, they knew very well that this was about their participation. They were ready for it.
And that's another thing that was very uncomfortable for me initially, to ask people for specific amounts of money. We had never done that before in a campaign, and that I personally was going to have to do that, I was really scared, but it got easier. Of course, CCS would come in with what numbers we should ask people for based on the wealth analysis and what they had given to Brick in the past, which is, of course, the major source of where to start is, you look at the people who have been most generous in the past and start with them.
And even then, it was a pretty wide range of gifts. There
Yes.
was some correlation between people's annual gift and what they gave in the campaign.
Yes.
There were also people who gave relatively modest annual contributions who in the campaign itself made extraordinary pledges. So it wasn't as easy as saying, well, because they give $5,000 a year to the annual fund, we could ask them for $50,000 a year for the campaign and be successful at both. And I think that's where the briefings came in. It gave us a real insight into people's appetite and their readiness and their willingness to entertain a big proposal.
And I think there were surprises at both ends. There were folks who gave much less than we thought they would, and there were people who gave much more. I had one family that we hadn't even scheduled for an individual meeting, and the father came in just to talk to me about something else, and he said, "Aren't you having a campaign?" And so then, of course, I always have everything ready to pull out. And I showed him the chart, and he said, "Oh, I think we can be here." And he pointed to 250,000, and that was just a total surprise. So it goes both ways in a campaign.
Mm-hmm. Maybe if we advance the slide once. We've talked around this a little bit, but I think from my perspective, Lydia, and please chime in if there's more to be added here, but I think there were like 3 primary reasons for your success. One is obviously your leadership and Michael Lindvall's leadership, and the fact that you were asking people and inviting them to back your strategic plan for the future rather than specific projects.
Mm-hmm.
I think that made the campaign just that much bigger. I think the fact that you had a very sort of prolonged, like a protracted silent phase, a lot of this was raised very kind of purposefully and silently, and you kept extending the silent phase because you had more and more prospects and they were responding well. You know, there's nothing worse than launching a campaign prematurely when you have a lot of prospects who, if you take the time to visit them one-on-one, will give you exponentially more. And you were under some pressure to launch. You know, you were coming on to annual giving season, and like there was a lot of pressure to just launch it and like go for broke. But you guys kind of stayed the course, and there was a small group who met weekly. And they were like tremendous. It was you and Michael and a handful of like high-level volunteers who were very busy people. And they came to weekly meetings, they took assignments, they went out and briefed people, they helped with gift requests. They really helped make this good to great sort of approach work. You know, we can have a good campaign or we can have a great campaign. So I think the silent phase and that week-to-week sort of focus on top major gifts, and then the public phase. So both at the church and the school, when you went public, it was coinciding with your annual giving. So there was the potential for a lot of confusion over like, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to increase my annual gift, or do you want me to make a multi-year pledge to the campaign? And I think because of the way you approached it, many families did both. You know, they increased or certainly maintained their annual support and then did something extraordinary over a 3 to 5 year period for the endowment component and the capital component and the general campaign components. It certainly on the church side, they did it under the heading of "We're all in." And "We're all in" meant you increased your annual support and you made an extraordinary pledge to the campaign. And they started with a group of leaders and they got 100% of them to do, you know, extended support for the annual fund and an extraordinary pledge. And that became the norm. So it's this like double ask. How do you get people to continue doing what they've been doing and then do something extraordinary on top of that? So from my perspective, I think those 3 things really served you well, especially the time that you and Michael put in it and your vision for the future.
So the silent phase wasn't, I mean, like most silent phases, it wasn't so silent. I mean, everyone knew this was going on. We had individual briefings where, as Charlie mentioned, Michael and I would meet with people individually before we asked. But we also had group briefings. We had breakfasts where the leaders of the campaign did a briefing for small groups of people. And we had one of the school's larger donors did a dinner and some cocktail parties where, again, it was the briefing phase. And then I would meet with those people individually, or Michael would for the church. So a lot was happening during the silent phase. And then when we went public, I thought about, well, when is the time I'm going to have the most parents here? And I did it at our back to school night where, you know, we had everyone gathered and I had slides and I talked about, you know, both the construction plans and the need to increase the endowment. And over the course of the year, one of the construction plans was really for the church to have a better Sunday school space, childcare space on Sundays. And as time went on, I realized we have been starting at age 3, and I've always wanted to have a twos program, but we didn't have the space. But I realized that the space the church was converting, we could convert, we could use for 2-year-olds. So I announced that at the open house, and that was not part of my conversations during the silent phase. And that aroused a whole lot of enthusiasm, both, you know, among school parents with babies, and with church parents, and with people who were alums who just thought it was a really good thing to do. So that was a big help in the public phase. Then we had class captains who were then in charge of calling or meeting with or doing breakfasts for the folks in their class who had not been approached in the silent phase. And that's what's gone on this year. And the brochure that we mailed after that open house had 2 sides to it, the annual fund and the capital campaign, and both were explained. And there was a pledge card inserted for both. So folks you know, we weren't asking them for one and then again for the other. We did both at the same time, which I think was effective. Questions?
Lydia, I have a question. Donna Kennedy at Gillen Brewer. Hello.
Hi, Donna.
Hi. Being that you hadn't been directly asking families before, and you know, running the school and having different relationships with families, can you talk a little bit about kind of how you prepared yourself for doing the direct ask, and also kind of how you led in to your conversations?
Sure. Well, how I prepared myself. I think the first ones that I did with Michael, the senior minister. We did together for the high potential folks who were both church and school. So he would talk about the church, I would talk about the school, and he did the actual asking, which calmed me down a bit for when I had to do it. This is really not my thing at all. But what I did, I would talk about the strategic plan, how excited I was about the fact that early childhood education's importance has become more and more recognized in recent years, both because of the research, because of the research really, but it has been recognized, and that these years are so important. And I talked about the fact that we were too dependent on annual giving, and that what I said at the beginning of this, that NYSAIS, when they told us to do a long-range financial plan, we realized we weren't on a sustainable path, and how during the strategic plan, folks supported that we fundraise more, because we wanted to remain committed to the great program, great teachers, great professional development, and diversity, great financial aid. So that's pretty much how I started out. And then I went into how low our endowment was, and, you know, compared to some schools with higher endowments, and that, you know, we really wanted to continue our mission to be the school we are for the next 75 years. That's pretty much how I started.
Okay.
And then talked about the campaign and the various aspects of it.
Okay, thanks.
It gets easier the more you do it.
How active is the head of school in fundraising in each of your institutions? If there's any way you can, or is it a challenge to get them more active?
I'm very active.
Yeah, it's not what we signed up for when we chose to go into education. It's certainly not what I expected I would be doing. But if you come across as just so committed to the mission of the school and, you know, the education, then people feel that, want to support you.
Yeah, I have to agree. I've been here for 23 years, so not only do I know the mission and the culture of the school, I know everybody who's graduated in the last 23 years.
Yes. Yeah, the relationships really help. I mean, the fact that I've been there so long does make it easier.
I'm going to pull that quote out and give that to my board.
And Dean, at your school, what is it that people are supporting? Like, what do you find that they're like most excited about in terms of their philanthropy?
Well, we've got a group from the 70s who are really excited about the athletic program, which is pretty successful. We're the reason I'm on this call is we're pursuing a capital campaign in the very near future to build a new girls' dormitory and to renovate a current girls' dormitory. And there's a big argument about whether we can do both at the same time. Should they be separate projects or should they be combined? In the current girls' dormitory is the iconic landmark building on the campus, which was at one time a boys' dormitory. So there's a greater draw of potential donors. And the new girls' dormitory is a necessity based on our new program to attract more girls. So we'll see what happens. It's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
New versus old.
You know, it might be the case where you, because you've been there for a very long time and obviously would have a lot of credibility, if you just say, look, this is something we have to do. We have to test both together. And in order to get there, the table of gifts would need to look like this. Like, test your best case vision-driven scenario and test it with 20 families whose giving would need to make it possible, rather than kind of
Yeah, I'm not ready to just throw it out there and hope for the best.
okay.
We did.
That development is past.
We did, with Charlie's advice, think about what aspects of the campaign would appeal to different people and emphasize those more. And one thing that came in later in the campaign, there are a couple of past parents who were long gone from the school who were involved in summer steps. So Charlie said, well, why don't you start an endowment for summer steps as well? So we did that with those parents, and they were enthusiastic about doing that. I don't know that they would have given to the school in general at the levels they gave to summer steps.
Yeah, I was curious about that. Giving people an opportunity to give to what they don't even know they want to give to yet. But once you find it out, then you give them that opportunity.
Yep.
So you have to be flexible in your campaign. It can't be just a rigid, this is the only thing we're raising money for.
Of course.
George, Michael, sorry. Whomever everyone's talking, I'm learning a lot from this. It's really great. I hope other people chime in.
And I think we have to have at least one question from Manlius Pebble Hill, partly because when I was growing up, I went to school at CBA, which is right next to Manlius Pebble Hill. And the bus that dropped me off at CBA would stop by Manlius Pebble Hill first. So I have like a long-standing, very light touch relationship with Manlius Pebble Hill.
She on?
Now we know what kind of relationship it was.
Bill, you looked like you had a question earlier. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
I was just about to ask a question when one of the dogs started barking, and I don't remember exactly what it was about, but it'll come back, I promise.
What kind of dog do you have?
3 Aussie Doodles.
Wow.
And I don't know why I didn't stay in the office to do this. I should have stayed there instead of coming home.
That's okay. We like the dogs.
So much of campaign fundraising or school fundraising is driven by major gifts. It's the top 5 pledges. It's the top 10 pledges that really account for 70, 80, sometimes a higher percentage of what you raise. What do you guys like? What's your sense of the current major gift environment out there? Are people receptive to it? We're seeing more, not only like cash gifts, but planned gifts and blended gifts. So it's a little bit of cash, maybe a 3 to 5 year pledge of cash, and then some kind of planned giving instrument. a lead trust, a remainder trust, life insurance, and then you put the two of them together and it allows people to get to much larger, more impactful pledge levels. What's happening out in your schools?
Well, I'll chime in. We're just engaged in the kind of pre-planning, in the planning phase of a capital campaign. And, in speaking with some of our top potential donors, we feel that the response hasn't been kind of the way that we had hoped, in that there's kind of a feeling of like, it's, we think these are things that we need to have versus nice to have. And so I was just curious kind of how you positioned your campaign as a need to have, or if there was, if how you made it the most compelling for people who would give to something that's a need to have versus a nice to have.
We were really going generally about wanting this to be a strong school going into the future. We weren't so much going into specifics. And one of our first gifts, which was a $500,000 gift, came from a parent who was leaving, parents who were leaving the school. And we really appealed to the special role that Brick has in this community, the importance of early childhood education, the values that we stand for, and they really wanted to support Brick as an institution for the difference it makes in New York. Now, Donna, you make a huge difference in what you do. So I would make a strong appeal. There are very few schools like yours, and how you really change lives, and the city doesn't have enough schools that do what you do, and that's the appeal I would go for.
I think what we're finding also, is however that a lot of our families are strictly and solely focused on their own child. There's a lot of is it, how is it going to impact my child? Is it going to affect my child by the time they leave? It's, our alumni draw has been, something that we've really looked at, because these families are so tapped out in terms of, they're fearful for their resources going forward. Young families with special needs children that, have very high medical bills and so forth. Even if they have the capacity, there's this fear. They're new to philanthropy. So the cultivation process, I'm thinking is really, it takes a very long time. And by the time you kind of get them to understand the value of the institution and the impact it's having on their child, it's almost like they want to see the impact that it's going to have, because each child is so uniquely different. And I think we've just really, it's been a part of our challenge with fundraising just on an annual basis is, kind of giving to the school for future generations is not really something that we've found to be quite compelling, because they move on to their next institution and they're investing, there. But as we've been building more things for our alums and trying to think about ways that we can, keep them engaged and involved, we're 25 years old. So,
yes.
And our oldest alums now, we have, less than 20 that are of, going into adulthood. And most of those, don't have the capacity to be engaged with the school themselves. It's their parents. And so we're seeing a lot come back to us wanting internships, but we're still not gaining traction in keeping those families engaged on a philanthropic level. We're just kind of trying to figure out what will be, what's most compelling, and how do we position it in a way when the family is really focused on what is kind of in it for their child, and the impact for their child.
Well, it's completely understandable when you have a child with special needs and you're worrying about the future and all the extra expenses that come with that, that you're not going to have big givers among current parents. Are there any people in the city who might be compelled to give to you because of what you do who aren't directly impacted? And what about foundation support?
Well, that's one of the areas that we have to do more work in. I think because we're such a small school, foundations often want, big impact. And so that's one of the, struggles that we've had. And also because we don't serve one narrow focused kind of group of special needs. We serve such a diverse group. So autism communities really look for big impact on the autism community, autism foundations on the autism community. We've got handfuls of different kinds of medically fragile kids that in and of itself, targeting a foundation when you have 3 kids, we're trying to figure out what's the, what are the best avenues for us to also look outside of our parent and board. And we're kind of at those initial stages of having those conversations to just get other people thinking more about who to put us in touch with to bring to the school, because it's compelling once they come.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Donna, for what it's worth, and I don't know if this is directly relevant to your school, but our experience of these campaigns is once you have a small group of people financially committed, then you spend as much time talking about those commitments as you do talking about what you're going to do with the money. If you can get more families joining that success, and people love joining success,
right?
And you get them giving together, not literally, but giving together, then that enables all of your priorities to move ahead quickly. Some of it is about attracting and retaining great teachers. I think you make the argument that we have to be investing in the schools so we can keep the really talented teachers that we have, because it's a very competitive world out there. I think you do need to have in your campaign some improvements that people can see quickly. It's not a bad thing to have the shovel in the ground stage in the campaign so people see their philanthropy at work. But it's getting as excited about the mechanics of the campaign and how you're going to raise the money and who raises it as you are about what you're going to do with it.
Right.
Especially in the city here where people are hyper competitive in many cases about philanthropy and campaigns, and they want to be associated with something that's historic and successful.
Right.
Looking at the time, are there any final questions for Charlie and Lydia before we wrap up? Anything that topic was raised today you'd like to know a little more about, or something you came hoping to get a little bit of clarification on to the session? We have a few minutes.
This is Jared at Studio. I'm just curious if you would speak a little bit about the public campaign, even though I know that was sort of the minority of your percentage of gift.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we launched it at open house with slides, and I talked, and then we had class captains who were in charge of soliciting people in their classes, both for the campaign and the annual fund. So they met with people individually, they made phone calls, they had breakfast, they did whatever they did. And last year during the public phase, we had a person from CCS working here every day, which helped tremendously to keep us on track, because as busy as Michael and I are, we would never have gotten done what we did without CCS pushing us, making appointments, telling us what to do. During the public phase, I had a part-time person helping, and she did that. I mean, I still had appointments during the public phase with, folks I hadn't met with last year, but she also followed up with the class reps the class campaign reps and kept checking in with them and supporting them and giving them advice and information as the year went on.
Thank you very much for that and for everything today.
Oh, you're welcome.